Hello and welcome to Season 4, Episode 11 of Logicast, the AWS News podcast brought to you by Logicata. I'm Carl Robinson, CEO and co-founder of Logicata, and I'm joined, as always, by, yes, you've guessed it, lead cloud engineer John Goodall. How are you doing today, John?
Oh, I can't complain. Doing DIY for other people instead of me this time round. It's always good fun.
What's quite amusing is when you say, I can't complain, you actually say it in quite a complaining tone of voice.
Yeah, I'm channeling, I don't know if I should say this or not. I'm channeling my inner coal miner. Oh, mustn't grumble, 17-hour shift and the foreman hates me. Mustn't grumble.
Just for the listeners' benefit, John's DIY this week has involved about a day's worth of annual leave to help his mother-in-law move house. So if anybody wants to send in any safe for work mother-in-law jokes, feel free.
I'm not sure any exist. No, I've been the resident tall person because she's like 5'6". My wife's 5'7", so I'm only 5'11", so I'm not exactly really tall, but I'm the resident person that can reach the top of the fridge and move the washing machine and that kind of deal, which is all good fun.
Might I suggest a stepladder? Not for moving the washing machine, but
that's a bit dangerous.
You might get some leverage off it, maybe, just to help move the washing machine across the floor. But anyway, we're not here to talk about mother-in-laws and moving domestic appliances. We are joined today by very special guest, AWS community builder, Joe Steck. How are you doing today, Joe?
Great. I'm doing great.
Tell us a bit about yourself, Joe. Where'd you come from? What do you do for a living? What do you do for the AWS community?
Yeah, so I live in Colorado, right in the middle of the U.S. I mostly blog for the AWS community. I like building things and then explaining how they get built. Serverless mostly, but also with Graviton processors, ARM processors, because I work for ARM. I'm a solutions architect here, and I mostly write learning paths on learn.arm.com and create technical demos and that type of fun stuff.
Cool. Well, we'll be sure to include a link to your blog in the show notes. How's the weather in Colorado at the moment?
It is very, very sunny out. It is, warmer than it has been in previous weeks. It fluctuates by plus or minus 50 degrees some days. So it's
is it still ski season? Are you near the mountains?
Yeah, the tail end. You can still go up and ski.
Yeah, for our European listeners, that'll be 50 degrees Fahrenheit. Because if it was fluctuating by 50 degrees Celsius, you'd all be dead.
Although we do occasionally get 50 degrees Celsius in certain parts of Europe in the summer, but it doesn't go down to 0 at night. That would be that would be quite intolerable, I think, if it did, and would confuse thermostats all over the continent. But anyway, John, you had something to say there?
No. I've pulled something moving a washing machine, so I'm struggling a little bit.
Should have had a stepladder, you see. So
yeah, then I'd have just fallen off and made a complete tit of myself.
Anyway, as regular listeners to the podcast will know, we often waffle about DIY, but it's not what we're really here to talk about. Once a week, I curate a list of AWS news, which I share via my weekly AWS News Roundup newsletter, or I do if I press the send button, which actually last Friday I forgot to do. So it went out on Monday, but it had been written and it was sitting there in the outbox for the entire weekend until I noticed that I'd forgot to press the send button. But there we are. So from the newsletter that was supposed to go out on Friday, but actually went out on Monday, John and I have picked a subset of the articles that we'd like to discuss with Joe today. So the first of those articles is just a feature announcement about Amazon EC2. And this is all about how Amazon EC2 Allowed AMIs now integrates with AWS Config. So, John, what are your thoughts on this one?
It's allowed AMIs. If it was AMI, there'd be full stops between the letters.
Okay. Well, you say potato, I say potato. Let's call the
I say
AMI
fish and
off,
chips,
but,
typically. Potato, tomato. I love butchering that expression so much. It's brilliant fun. Annoys so many people. Right, yes. Butchering metaphors aside, this is interesting if you need it and really dull if you don't. So, for the one person listening that cares about this, you're welcome. And for everybody else, put up with it. What this is doing. So, EC2 Allowed AMIs, now integrating with AWS Config. So, Allowed AMIs is an account-wide EC2 setting. That means you can say, these AMIs are available for this account, and you're allowed to use them. Why would you want that in the first place? That's not the new feature, but it's worth understanding. That's really useful in things like regulated environments and secure environments where you must use hardened images, or your central security team has said you can use these ones because we've approved them through whatever process it is that we've been through. Brilliant. And typically that's, again, like I say, around machine and image hardening. So using SSH on a non-standard port, that kind of thing, just off the top of my head. Prior to today, you had to make custom scripts to monitor your impact of enabling allowed AMIs. And what does that mean? Again, that's around people trying to launch things that they're not meant to. Are they having issues? Are they having problems? Are they circumventing it somehow? That kind of deal. And now there's just a config rule. This is one of the long list of things of why didn't they just do that for me? And now they've done it for you. Brilliant.
Nice. Well, before I ask Joe his opinion on this, I'd just like to point out a flaw in your logic, John, because if AMI is not AMI because of the missing dots, then AWS must be AWS.
I say that sometimes. I do say that sometimes, but I am a professional troll.
Anyway, I think I'm having connection problems, which is
well,
I think I'm having connection problems today, which is going to make the rest of the episode interesting. But anyway, let's go to Joe for his opinion on this one. What are your thoughts on this, Joe?
Yeah, this seems like one of those things that if you don't use it all the time, if you don't use AWS Config all the time, you would be surprised that the feature didn't already exist. It reminds me of when I see something in quotas. Now you can control this quota via the AWS quota system, and I'll think, wow, I totally thought that you could control those before. So yeah, this is one of those feature releases. I feel like.
Yeah, this is very interesting in terms of if you need it, it's great, and if you don't need to care. The config rule is interesting because you can use audit mode with allowed AMIs, and that basically means, was anything launched that doesn't match my rule before I turn my rule on? Cool, go and give me all the list of them. And you can use that with config and get the kind of the data, you can go and remediate. So like I say, if you're in an environment where you need this is really handy, and you can do the whole bunch of custom scripting. And if you don't need this, I'm sorry for wasting 4.5 minutes of your life.
Did you time that then? Because I didn't.
I'm guessing. I'm looking at the elapsed time. I think it's about 4 minutes. I'm guessing.
Well, if we've done 4.5 minutes on a 2-paragraph article, it's probably time to move on to the next article, which is much, much longer. In fact, it's so long, I had to scroll an awful long way back to the top. And I didn't switch to my trackpad, which I normally use for long scrolls, because it scrolls much faster than the mouse scroll wheel. But anyway, this next article is an article from the AWS Database blog, or the AWS Database blog, as it's now going to have to be called, by deploying John's logic. So this is an article all about demystifying Amazon DynamoDB, or it has to be Amazon DynamoDB on demand capacity mode. So I'm interested on this one, John, because I know that you've got some fairly strong opinions around DynamoDB and its various the differences between sort of pricing for on-demand versus provisioned capacity. But before I come to you for your opinion, I just want to point out that this article, there's an awful lot of myths around Amazon DynamoDB, apparently, because this article aims to dispel 11 myths in total about Amazon DynamoDB. It does go some way towards categorizing them into different categories of myths, so cost, operational, etc. But yeah, so many myths around DynamoDB that 11 of them in this article need to be dispelled. So yeah, thoughts on this, John?
I didn't think most of these were myths. The myth, blah blah blah. Nobody thought that. For a few of them, genuinely, I thought, who thinks that? Like, okay, we'll rattle through them nice and quick because there's 11 of them, and we'll go kind of reasonably quickly. There's a big kind of answer to a lot of them, but okay. So cost ones, per request price for on demand is more expensive than provisioned. Well, it kind of is. That's the point. But there's, it talks more about TCO. So each request costs you more, okay, but you're also paying for the request that you didn't use if you provisioned. So fine, you're playing in the margins here, but like whatever. It's always cheaper to use provision mode with auto scaling. Nobody thinks that. It's not. It's not, because you're paying for stuff you might not use. Cool. Next. On demand charges you for unused capacity. Nobody thinks that. Do they? I never did. Okay, wonderful.
What about you, Joe? Were any of those myths a reality for you? Those first ones on pricing?
No, no. I thought that those were pretty well understood.
Well, apparently not, according to Esteban Parra, who wrote this article. But I guess somebody somewhere had brought this up as an issue. Anyway, John, onwards with the performance and scaling myths.
On-demand tables have a slower response time. Again, I didn't think anybody thought that. It was always the response time was the response time. They might scale up in terms of their ability to meet traffic somewhat slower, but that's not the same thing. Again, it feels like we're stretching. It's the information here is great, but it feels like we're stretching to find a blog post, if I'm honest. Next one, won't scale higher than 40,000 read and write capacity units. I've never seen that stated anywhere, that 40,000 is anything other than like a quota limit. And to Joe's point in the previous one, I didn't know this was even a quota until this article. So, okay, wonderful. That's just an account level setting. Whatever. And
well, I guess that's where the myth comes from, because if you didn't know it was a quota, then nobody else knew it was a quota either, I guess.
Maybe, but my default whenever I see something saying, no, you're not allowed to do that, is I'll go and look at the quota. Because typically I've hit a quota I didn't know existed, because there's a lot of them. So, cool.
And then you send the, please, sir, can I have some more email to Amazon support?
That's the thing with quotas, isn't it? It's some requests are approved automatically, some take longer, and you have never quite work out where the line is, because in some cases it's even the same quota that you can put one request through and it's immediate, and you put the next request through for not a lot more than the previous one, and then that takes 3 days. I don't get that. Okay. And then the last one is you can't scale beyond twice your previous peak. I'd never heard of that.
What about you, Joe? Have you heard of any of these? Has any myths been busted by this section on performance and scaling?
No, but I think in general, the fact that this article exists sort of implies that so many changes have been made to DynamoDB over the years that that if you're sort of out of the loop for like a year or two, you might not even know how DynamoDB really like works anymore in some ways. It's every one of these myths seems to be talking about how on demand is denigrated in the community because for provisioned, but it's like, use these on demand features because these are not myths anymore. Maybe they used to be in the past. I don't know.
Well, things do change at quite a pace in AWS, so it can be hard to keep up, especially if you've taken an old exam which was based on a previous feature set that hasn't caught up yet.
That's a real challenge. That's a real challenge, because I'm studying for SA Pro at the minute, and I'm going through some of the practice questions going, I know what you want me to say, but that's not true as of 3 months ago, and I know that, but I have to tell you the wrong one because I know what you're asking for, and that's just awful. Should we go through the rest of them or not?
Yeah, we're on the well, we've got another category, haven't we? So the next category is operational myths.
You can't control on-demand consumption. Yes, you can. You've always been able to do that with every service that has an on-demand mode. It's called throttling. Okay. On-demand tables need to be pre-warmed. Maybe this is my not using DynamoDB at really big scale, because I've never had this problem. I've never, ever had this problem. But then my usage of Dynamo has never been at these enterprise grade, millions of requests a minute territory. It's always been at the hobbyist level. So maybe that one is me not using it at those kind of service limit areas, maybe. Don't know. Changing table capacity requires downtime. That one's in the exam. Like, that's actually in the DevOps exam, that one. Like, okay, is everyone just getting that question wrong?
Or maybe they haven't done the exam. I haven't done that exam. Yeah.
Don't recommend.
Mm.
It's unless you need it. It's not a nice thing to have to go and do.
Have you done that one, Joe?
No, I haven't done any AWS exams.
You know, you get free vouchers, right? And training as part of being in the AWS Community Builder program.
I'm admitting this all in public. It's terrible.
Yeah. So what about that category for you? Any of those operational myths ringing true?
No, I've never had a misconception based on those myths.
All right, let's go on to the final couple of alleged myths and the common implementation misconceptions.
Yeah, on-demand tables will fix my throttling. I've been a little bit guilty of this in the past, and I've never outright gone and said this. My attitude has been, unless you know your workload patterns, use on-demand and stop thinking about it. That doesn't mean that it's only for spiky workloads, which is the next one, or that it will fix your throttling. It won't, because the way it works is it will scale to a level and it'll sit there for a bit, and then it will scale to a level and it'll sit there for a bit, and it will scale to a level and it will sit there for a bit. It's not like Lambda that scales out at these logarithmic rates where it just exponentially goes whomph as it scales out thousands per minute. Your DynamoDB doesn't scale like that. It will sit there, it will go to a level, and it will sit there for half an hour, and it will go to a level and sit there for half an hour. So you might get throttled. But most throttling errors that I've ever come across have been you didn't give it enough because you've provisioned 10 RCU. On-demand absolutely fixes for that. It just doesn't fix for it at the top end of your thousands of RCUs. Cool. Wonderful. So I don't know if that's a misconception or if that's just a misunderstanding of people like me saying, and I could be clearer, sure, of saying just use on-demand and stop thinking about it. And honestly, the same is for myth 11, which is it's only for spiky workloads. No, it's not only for spiky workloads, but that's generally what it's quite good for. But equally, it's for low-use platforms. It's for even consistent, steady-state platforms with occasional spikes, or for just I can't be bothered to work it out platforms, because the price difference isn't that big, really.
Well, there we go. Joe, either of those two myths busted for you?
Yeah, it's hard to even what this feels like it's saying is it's for spiky workloads, but not too spiky. The thing that this article is really conveying to me is understand your own workload and don't think that some serverless service is going to take care of everything for you. Like, you still have to understand how things work.
Great advice there from Joe. It doesn't only apply to DynamoDB, of course, it applies to all workloads and most AWS services. So there we go. So hopefully we may have dispelled some myths for some from listeners there, but it seems that everyone that we've got on the podcast today already knew all of these things, which is great because we are supposed to be the AWS experts after all. So on that note, let's move along. Am I still there? Let's move along to our next article for this week. Are you guys hearing me okay? Because I just had a notification that my connection dropped.
Yeah, you're fine.
Yep. So on that note, let's move along to our next article for this week, which is an article on the AWS Database blog for all about long-term backup options for Amazon RDS and Amazon Aurora. So, Joe, I'm going to come to you on this one first. What are your thoughts around this? You doing much with RDS and Aurora?
I think this is really cool, but I personally don't really have a use for it. It's one of those things where I'm using Postgres almost exclusively when I'm doing RDS, and a combination of sort of PG dump and PG restore for long-term backups, and then just the snapshots, the regular RDS snapshots for day-to-day backups is sufficient for me. But I could see a lot of scenarios where this these long-term backup options, these other long-term backup options will be very useful.
So we use, as part of our service delivery for our customers, we're big users of AWS Backup, and that's not necessarily the cheapest thing in the world, but it's great because you just sort of set policy, off you run, stop thinking about it, which again, regular listeners would know I'm a big fan of that way of working. Is get a procedure or a policy in place, automate it, stop having to think about it. That brilliant, because you can just move on and do other things that add value to the business. Wonderful. The options laid out in the article, it talks about long term. And the reason it talks about long term is things like normal automated backups have a maximum retention of something like 35 days. It's 35 days in the article. I think it's 35 days for all the database engines. And that's not considered long term because, that's a month. It's a smidge more than a month. It's not long term. Long term, we're thinking months, years, decades, if you're that way inclined, or if you're a regulator. And it kind of goes through your various options. So various options, manual snapshots. Wonderful. We like a manual snapshot because you just say, give me a backup, please. And it will keep it until you get rid of it long term. It's probably not the cheapest thing to do because it will store it at the storage rate for the engine that you're using and the region that you're in. Cool. They're not horrifically expensive, and because of witchcraft, anything other than Aurora, I might add, a manual snapshot is charged just at the rate of data that's different from that one to any other that you've got stored. So if you've got one full snapshot somewhere, great, that one's going to cost you some money, and the rest of them are going to cost you quite a lot less, because unless the entire contents of your database is changing every single day, and if it is, you should use something different. It's not going to, you're not going to be paying the full whack every time. So manual snapshot, good, but it gives you management concerns. What's next? DMS, Migration Service. So it can migrate data to and from various other stores. Okay, you can use it to migrate infrequently accessed data. Yes, you can. It feels like you're doing a lot of work for what's basically a MySQL dump or a PG dump, to be honest, because that's all they're actually doing. That feels like you're doing a lot of work there. Export your snapshots to S3. I like that. They're already backed into S3 anyway, but what this does is this allows you to take advantage of the significantly cheaper storage cost in S3, particularly if you go into things like Glacier and Deep Archive, where you're paying, I don't know, what is it, $1 for a terabyte or something in the really deep archive tiers. It's aggressively cheap. So whilst you don't benefit from the Delta-based pricing, it's so cheap, who cares? Wonderful. Talks about that, and then it talks about using your PG dump and your MySQL dump and your Oracle, whatever it is, and SQL Server and all the rest of it. But the point is, there are probably about half a dozen different ways, even before you get to OS native tools, that you can use to back your database up. So you don't have to rely on the automated snapshot and think, I can only keep a month's worth of backups. No, there's a whole heap of different options that you can go through. Some of them more expensive than others, some of them easier than others. I don't think it was listed in the article, but my kind of preferred way of doing long-term backups, sort of medium-term backups as well, really, is AWS Backup, because it will take them on a schedule and it will stick them in a vault and it will get rid of them when you tell it to. So again, it's this set and forget approach that I really like. I don't think it was in the article. I certainly don't remember seeing it in there. But you set a policy, you say it runs on this, it goes into that vault, and it will get rid of it automatically after a year or after 2 years or 7 years or whatever. That's not as cheap as exfilling it into something like S3, but it's set and forget. Job done.
I'm not sure I'd actually advocate this set and forget approach. I would probably go more down the route of set, monitor, and test, rather than completely forget about it.
What is it they say? Trust but verify. That's...
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I'd just like to say Glacier potato. I'm sure John gets that reference. So, yeah. Joe, do you have anything more useful to add than that useless quip that I ended on there?
Um, I'm kind of curious to get both of your opinions on long-term backups. And have you used any of your long-term backups ever, other than for audit purposes? I've been using RDS for a really long time, and if something is broken, I feel like I'm going to find it within, for sure, a couple days, and use regular snapshots. I've never actually gone to any long-term backups, even though I recognize that they're useful and for risk mitigation. Have you used long-term backups before?
Nope.
Yes, but only for audit purposes, as you've described. So I think it's less likely to be something's broken, I need to fix it, because it's highly unlikely you're going to want to go back to a state from 3 years ago to repair something that's broken today. But in terms of subject matter access requests, or whatever they're called, if you get the law enforcement bodies coming to you and saying, I need this data, on this subject from this point in time, then I think that's where it's most likely to come in useful, if that's kind of aged out of your database, your data lifecycle. So it's pretty rare. So I guess it depends on the industry that you work in and what kind of regulatory compliance that you're looking to comply with or adhere to. But I am going back quite a long way. I'm going back to the long-term backups at the back of my brain to try and dredge out a use case for this, because it is very rare, I have to say. But yeah, I think, as I say, it's more likely to be for some kind of compliance reason or audit reason than something's broken.
The only use case I've ever come across is, and this will vary depending on the territory that you're in, but certainly the last time I looked, financial records in the UK, you had to hang on to them for, I think it's 6 or 7 years. And that's kind of the only thing I can come up with is why you'd need that, is because it's financial data and you need to keep it to comply with regulation.
Yep, absolutely. So there we go. Long-term backup options for RDS might be useful, might not be. Depends what you're doing and on your use case. So on that note, let's move along to our next article for this week. And this is an article on the AWS News blog, all about the DeepSeek R1 model now being available as a fully managed serverless model in Amazon Bedrock. So I think we have spoken about DeepSeek R1 being available through Bedrock before. What's changed, John, from the initial release of it going GA into it becoming a fully managed serverless model? Or is this just some more detail on that recent announcement?
You don't have to run it yourself. That's the difference. So a lot of noise was made about, we're the first people to be able to run DeepSeek. And you could, but you bought it through the marketplace. And I think it ran on an EC2 of all places. And then it was imported into Bedrock as a custom model. This is now a managed model, which means it's serverless. So no service you have to worry about and run. And I believe the pricing is per token, like every other managed model. So maybe that's a good thing for you. Maybe that's a bad thing for you. I don't know, because it depends on your usage, right? We are quite open about the fact that the transcript for this will go through. We use Claude Sonnet 3.5. I was going to go 3.5 then. 3.5, and that charges you per token. And that means that if we have a really long episode, we pay more to get it kind of looked at. And if we have a really short episode, then we're very sad that we didn't have an interesting and engaging conversation for the listeners, but we pay a bit less for all the processing to go, right? When DeepSeek was first out, it was you just paid, boof. And that was the price because it was based on the kit that it was running on. Now it's per token, as far as I understand from this. So that's kind of the primary difference, is you don't have to worry about making sure the kit's running and up and available and security and all that jazz. It's just, here's the model, go use it.
Thoughts on this, Joe? You doing much with AI yourself?
Yeah, what John said is matches my understanding. I myself haven't used DeepSeek yet. I tend to use the more cutting edge models. My favorite right now is Sonnet 3.7. It's really amazing to ask questions to and get little coding snippets from. I don't know anybody using DeepSeek in production, but I could see it being very useful for things like data extraction from documents that are sort of open-ended and things like that. We had I used to work for Thomson Reuters, and we did some document data extraction on things like charity letters for taxes, right? If a charity letter is totally random format, everybody has a different one, and they're really good at just like pulling out those numbers to put into your taxes. So I assume this DeepSeek model is great for things like that.
Do you think people are concerned about the Chinese connection, or are they so trusting of Amazon Bedrock's guardrails that there's no chance of any data that you might put into a DeepSeek model ever getting anywhere near China?
It is a fascinating idea that somehow a model running on Amazon servers could be sneaky enough to get data out to China. But I was shocked that so many people were using DeepSeek and actually, the Chinese hosted version of DeepSeek. That they seem to have very few concerns about their data security there.
The China thing is really amusing to me, just generally speaking. When you talk about, and I know we're not meant to talk about social media, but I'm going to talk about TikTok for 1 minute. When you talk about TikTok being banned for 14 whole hours in the States, and it was, the Chinese are getting your data. No, Senator, I'm Singaporean. But the best commentary that came out of that was, my favorite quote was, "I would drop ship my DNA to the Chinese Communist Party HQ before I would give it to Facebook." Like, okay, like I don't think people really care that much.
I don't know whether it's they care or whether they just don't even think about it. I mean, we have to remember that we all work in the industry, and these are concerns shared by large enterprise clients who are managing PII for other businesses, the consumers, and everything else. The average user of TikTok is probably about half your age, John, and this really has had no thoughts whatsoever about data concerns, data privacy. Probably not even thought about the word data as they're entering their email address and other information into such apps. So
you've just made me feel really old, by the way, because someone genuinely half my age is almost a legal adult now, and that's terrifying.
Yeah, they're probably still lying about their age, so they're able to use social media apps, which is a problem that world is still yet to solve. But I keep getting informed of birthdays that haven't actually happened because it was kids lying about their age to get onto Facebook and Instagram and things like that. So, it's an interesting question. I'm sure that the guardrails and everything else, like you say, Joe, this is running on Amazon servers in the US, and there's likely to be zero, if a very minimal risk. It was more, my question was more about perception, really, whether there's a perceived risk that might prevent people from using these models. But anyway,
they might have some bias, right? Some unintended bias that users are not aware of. So that I think certainly is a totally reasonable concern.
Slight tangent, but I think I mentioned this to you on Friday, John, but I was shaming an AI model into performing better last week. It was quite an interesting conversation that the emotion came into the prompt interaction with the I think I was on Perplexity, and I'd asked it to extract some data from something, and it was doing a very poor job. And I said, come on, you can do better than that. And it replied saying, yeah, you're right. I'm sorry. I'm going to try this way, and here's the correct answer. And I think, how bizarre is this? I'm having this kind of shaming conversation with a large language model. But there we are.
Well, negative reinforcement is a thing, and it doesn't work on humans or animals, but maybe it works on LLMs.
It worked for me. So, there we go. Not necessarily suggesting that's the approach that everybody should adopt to interacting with LLMs, but it worked for me. Anyway, on that note, let's move along to our final article for this week, and something we haven't had for a while, but we do feature on a fairly regular basis on the podcast. It's another leaky bucket. So this is an article on SC Magazine UK. The title is Misconfigured AWS S3 Bucket Exposes US Nurses Data. So some very PII exposed here. I had a look, and 86,000 records featuring profile photos, facial image, social security cards, driver's license, professional certificates, etc., prescription records, disability insurance claims. So this is not great, is it? What are your thoughts on this, Joe?
I think this is one of those things that's actually going to it toned down for a while, I feel like, but I think we're going to see an upsurge in these types of leaky buckets again, with the advent of vibe coding, and using sorry for using the term. There are a lot of people out there right now who are asking LLMs questions about how to build their software, and they are not super technical. And my guess is these types of things are going to be seen more again, even though they have been seen less in recent years.
It's an interesting point, actually. I hadn't considered that. The specifics of the leak is 11 gig of nurses' data leaked for months by an unprotected S3 bucket. Cool. That's nothing really new. That's been happening less and less and less because AWS has been making great strides in making sure that that's really hard to do accidentally. Because when S3 was a newish service, it was really easy to just go, public, thanks very much. Now you have to... swishing tail there. Now you have to go through several steps to make a bucket public, because by default you can't do it across the whole account, so you have to change that setting. Then you have to go and do it on the bucket, and then it tells you off at the ACL level. It tells you off repeatedly, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. With this LLM based coding, I hate the term vibe coding, because what are you doing it for? It's just good vibes. Okay, this is the 60s again. Like, what's going on here? This is people, as you say, Joe, that are not super technical, that are getting an AI to spit something out at the other end, that they don't really understand what it's doing. It works. Great. Put it live. Do you know why it works? Nope. And this is the thing that you kind of learn through either formal education, if you've been through that process, or just through hard experience of you can't just copy stuff off of the internet and expect it to work. Do not do that. It might work, it might not. Odds are you're going to hurt yourself eventually. Either it's just going to not work immediately, and that's going to go, that's really annoying, or it's going to work, but there's going to be a problem that you didn't know about that's going to rear itself at 3 o'clock in the morning on some idle Tuesday, and that's how you end up debugging it in your parents' spare room because it also happens to be Christmas. Like, brilliant, wonderful. So yeah, it's an interesting angle that I hadn't considered, but you might be right. We might start to get more and more of this, but I'd like to think it's not from malconfigured S3 buckets, because you have to jump through a lot of hoops to do that.
Yeah, maybe, and maybe there's plenty of examples in the training data of people doing this and getting yelled at.
We ought to just end on the anecdote of the conversation that you and I were having earlier, John, about AWS's mandate of thou shalt not use public buckets unless one wants to list a product on AWS Marketplace, where that's the only place you can put the logo for your Marketplace listing is in a public bucket. So it prevented me from listing a product on Marketplace earlier, because obviously none of our buckets are public. They're all locked down at the account and organization level. But now I have specifically requested a public bucket, because that's the only way for me to share a product logo with AWS Marketplace. So come on, AWS, give me another way to share my logo with you that doesn't require me to have a public bucket. I mean, it won't be a big issue because that'll be the only thing in there. But still, perhaps not best practice and perhaps not ideal.
It's like, I'm going to quote Brian from last week, actually. We shouldn't do all of these things apart from when we should.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Anyway, on that note, we have reached the end of our time for season 4, episode 10 of Logicast. So I must apologize if there have been any audio or video issues on my part. I assume the teenagers are home gaming or something and killing my network. But we muddled through. So it only remains for me to thank you, John, as always, for your insights. And thank you very much, Joe, for joining us today as our guest and sharing your insights as well. It's been great to have you along, and hear your thoughts on last week's AWS news. So, as I said, that is all we have time for. If you've enjoyed the podcast, we are available to download wherever you get your podcasts. So please like, share. We also have a YouTube channel where if you'd like to see the faces that we're pulling when we're talking to you, you can watch the videos on our YouTube channel. So please go over there and like and subscribe. We'll be back next week with another episode of the Logicast AWS News Podcast. Until then, thanks for listening and see you again next time.